1 minute ago, everything changed. A private office, a sealed drawer, and a discovery that stopped Princess Anne cold. Sources claim she wasn't meant to see what was inside King Charles's most guarded workspace, but she did. And what she found wasn't just personal. It was explosive. The question isn't why she looked. The question is why it was hidden in the first place. King Charles's private office has always operated like a fortress within a fortress. Even among senior royals, access is unspokenly restricted. It is a space where sensitive decisions are shaped long before they reach public light, where the monarchy's quiet strategies take form. For years, Princess Anne respected that boundary. She has built her reputation on discipline, restraint, and loyalty. She does not intrude. She does not pry. And yet on this particular morning, already tense with undercurrents, no one openly acknowledged she stepped across a line few dare approach. It was not premeditated. It was not dramatic. It was a moment of instinct. Palace sources describe an atmosphere thick with urgency earlier that day, advisors moving quickly, hushed exchanges in corridors, doors closing a fraction too fast. Anne noticed. She always notices. And when she entered Charles's private workspace, something immediately felt wrong. Not chaotic, not disordered, just disturbed. The drawer was locked, as it always is. But it wasn't fully closed. It sat slightly ajar, just enough to suggest someone had accessed it in haste. That detail alone would have been enough to unsettle her. But Anne does not react to small irregularities. She studies them, she reads between them. And when she pulled the drawer open, what lay inside shifted the ground beneath her. Documents were stacked carefully, yet not carefully enough. Financial markings ran across several pages: allocations, transfers, trust references, each bearing handwritten annotations unmistakably belonging to Charles. Not formal signatures, not official stamps, personal notes, margins marked in ink, adjustments circled, dates underlined. The kind of edits made when decisions are being shaped quietly, deliberately, beyond committee oversight. And then there was the photograph. It had been placed face down beneath the paperwork, almost hidden but not entirely, as if someone intended it to remain unseen, but did not have the time to bury it fully. When Anne turned it over, witnesses say her composure shifted in an instant. Not loudly, not theatrically, but visibly. A stillness fell over her that those who know her well recognize as controlled fury. The image triggered something deeper than surprise. It triggered recognition. Moments later, she left the office. One staff member described her as visibly shaken but furious, a rare combination for a woman known for steel-like calm. Within minutes, she requested a private meeting with Charles. No aides, no intermediaries, no delay. Palace staff were placed on unusual alert. Movements were tracked more carefully. Conversations softened mid-sentence when she passed. Because what Princess Anne found was not a minor oversight. It was not a clerical misstep. It was something calculated, something concealed. And as the palace walls absorbed the tension building between brother and sister, one truth became impossible to ignore. This discovery was only the beginning. But what exactly was inside that drawer wasn't just paperwork, it was something far more personal and far more dangerous. The photograph was old, but the implications were new. Hidden beneath official correspondence was an image that sources claim connects Charles to a private arrangement never disclosed to the royal family. And when Princess Anne saw who was standing beside him in that photo, her silence turned into something sharper. This wasn't nostalgia. This was evidence. The image itself was not grand, not ceremonial, not something framed for public admiration. It carried the quiet weight of something never meant for wider eyes. Charles stood composed, but not in an official capacity. There were no state emblems, no press, no visible context to soften the moment. And beside him stood a figure whose presence has long been whispered about in royal circles, but never formally acknowledged in connection with sensitive estate negotiations. The positioning alone spoke volumes, close enough to suggest familiarity, confident enough to imply trust. The date printed in faint ink along the edge of the photograph struck even deeper. It traced back to a politically fragile period within the monarchy, A transition moment, when internal alliances were shifting and public narratives were carefully managed. It was a time when unity had to be projected at all costs. And yet, during that delicate chapter, Charles appears to have been engaged in something far more private. Something strategic. Something shielded from the very institution he was sworn to protect. The background of the photo offered another layer of tension. Those familiar with royal holdings would recognize the estate grounds immediately. It was not a casual location. It was property tied to a controversial negotiation that had quietly resurfaced months ago, an estate whose ownership structure has always carried quiet debate within the royal trust. Seeing that location frozen in a candid moment with that particular individual beside Charles shifted the narrative entirely. This was not coincidence. It was coordination. Sources claim that as Anne studied the image, she exhaled slowly and murmured, "This explains everything." The words were not loud, they were not dramatic, but they carried a weight that suggested realization rather than shock. As if fragmented suspicions she had carried for years had suddenly aligned into one undeniable truth. The photograph did not just reveal a meeting. It hinted at concealed financial or personal ties arrangements possibly made outside the oversight of the royal council. Why the image had been placed beneath recent legal paperwork only intensified the mystery. It was as though the past and present had been deliberately layered together, the old arrangement resurfacing at the precise moment new documents were being drafted. Not archived, not forgotten, revisited. That placement suggested intent, not accident, and Anne understood intent better than anyone. Within minutes, palace aides were quietly instructed to retrieve internal office surveillance logs. Not publicly, not formally, but urgently. Questions began to move through corridors that had once felt secure. Who else had seen the drawer open? Who authorized access? And more importantly, how long had this connection existed beyond the knowledge of senior royals? Suspicion, once dormant, began to stir into something far more dangerous. Because if the photograph had remained hidden for years, what else had been carefully buried within layers of protocol and silence? Anne's discovery was no longer just about a single image. It was about a pattern of secrecy that may have stretched far beyond this one moment. And if the photograph was unsettling, the financial records beneath it were even more troubling. It wasn't just a photograph. Beneath it lay a paper trail signed, dated, and quietly authorized. Transfers. Allocations. Trust adjustments. The kind of movements that don't happen without intention. Princess Anne has always protected the monarchy's financial integrity. But what she uncovered suggested something had been redirected, and possibly concealed from the royal trust itself. The documents were not chaotic. They were precise. Carefully structured amendments referencing established trust funds that have supported royal estates for generations. But woven between the formal language were modifications that did not match prior reporting cycles. Percentages shifted subtly. Allocations rerouted. Small on the surface, almost invisible to anyone not trained to read between the lines, but significant enough to alter long-term control. Anne has spent decades safeguarding the crown's financial framework. While others navigated public image and ceremonial duty, she focused on structure, sustainability, accountability. She understands that behind every ribbon-cutting and state appearance lies a financial engine that must remain untarnished. And as her eyes moved from line to line, a pattern began to form. This wasn't miscalculation. It was recalibration. Charles's handwriting appeared in the margins, brief notes, arrows, circled clauses. Not casual scribbles. Deliberate directions. Words like expedite, confidential, and direct oversight underlined with emphasis. That handwriting made one fact undeniable. This was personal authorization. No bureaucratic delay. No committee dilution. A direct intervention. One particular estate appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. A private property long associated with sensitive negotiations, mentioned only in limited internal discussions. Its valuation had quietly increased in recent months. Its governance structure had shifted. And yet, there had been no formal presentation to the full royal council. That silence now felt deafening. More troubling was the beneficiary designation. It was structured through layered legal phrasing, shielding the ultimate recipient behind intermediary trusts. On paper, everything appeared compliant. But Anne knew compliance can be engineered. She recognized the architecture of discretion when she saw it. The estate's linkage to undisclosed beneficiaries raised a chilling possibility that financial influence had been quietly consolidated without collective consent. The timing sharpened the stakes. These amendments coincided almost perfectly with recent internal disagreements conversations about succession optics, resource allocation, and strategic positioning of royal properties. Tensions that had remained contained now seemed connected to something deeper. Had these financial shifts been the unspoken root of those disagreements? Had Charles anticipated resistance and moved ahead anyway? Anne's historic role in overseeing financial review processes placed her in an uncomfortable position. If these changes had bypassed council consultation, it wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was a fracture in governance. The monarchy thrives on unity presented outwardly, but internally it depends on trust. And trust, once questioned, is difficult to restore. There were no public alarms, no dramatic announcements, but within hours, an emergency internal review was quietly initiated. Select advisors were summoned discreetly. Background audits were requested under the guise of routine updates. Every movement was subtle, controlled, strategic. The palace would not allow panic to surface, but beneath that calm exterior, foundations were shifting. As Anne processed the implications, a deeper unease settled in. This wasn't only about redirected funds or estate leverage. It wasn't merely a matter of oversight. The annotations, the timing, the secrecy, they pointed toward something more intimate. A choice made not just as a monarch, but as a brother. A calculation that blended duty with personal allegiance. And that realization cut sharper than any financial irregularity. Because the money trail was not leading toward mismanagement. It was leading toward motive, toward loyalty, toward the quiet question no one dared to ask aloud. Who was Charles protecting? But the money trail led to something even more destabilizing than finances. It led to loyalty. For decades, Princess Anne has stood as the monarchy's quiet enforcer, disciplined, unwavering, fiercely loyal. But loyalty cuts both ways. And what she discovered suggested her own loyalty may not have been returned. This wasn't about money. This was about trust, and whether Charles had protected the institution or compromised it. Anne has never chased attention. While others carried the glamour of the crown, she carried its weight. She showed up. She endured scrutiny without complaint. She defended the institution when headlines turned hostile. In moments when the monarchy trembled under public pressure, she did not retreat. She tightened ranks. She absorbed the strain. And more than once, she shielded her brother from storms that could have grown far worse. There were past controversies, delicate matters whispered behind closed doors, that Anne helped steady with quiet resolve. She supported strategic messaging. She urged patience when criticism flared. She believed in preserving unity above personal discomfort. That has always been her strength. Her loyalty was not blind, but it was firm. Until now. Because the documents in that photograph reopened something older. Old succession debates. Private disagreements about direction and leadership that were never meant to surface again. There had been moments, subtle but real, when Anne questioned certain choices Charles made during transitional periods. Not publicly. Never publicly. But internally, there were concerns about concentration of control. About narrowing circles of consultation. She had set those concerns aside for the sake of stability. Now, they returned with sharper edges. Rumors began to swirl about the involvement of a controversial advisor, someone long seen as influential in shaping Charles's more guarded decisions. A strategist known for prioritizing discretion over transparency. If that advisor had played a role in restructuring trust allocations or managing estate shifts, then the secrecy was not accidental. It was designed. Among the documents was a confidential memorandum, marked for restricted disclosure. It referenced limited internal awareness and strategic timing. The language was clinical, but its implication was personal. Certain senior royals were not meant to know. Consultation was to be minimized. Information was to be compartmentalized. Anne read those words not as policy, but as exclusion. Charles has always been deliberate, thoughtful, private. But over time, that privacy evolved into pattern. Decisions taken quietly. Adjustments made without broad discussion. A leadership style rooted in control rather than collective oversight. Anne had tolerated it because outcomes often justified the means. Yet this felt different. This felt like a line crossed. She did not react emotionally in public corridors. She never does. Instead, she requested clarification from royal legal counsel calmly, directly, without accusation. Questions about process, about authorization, about compliance. But beneath those measured inquiries lay something far more human: hurt. Because if Charles believed secrecy was necessary, why had he not trusted her? Why had he chosen concealment over conversation? That was the wound beneath the protocol. Not betrayal in the dramatic sense, but something quieter, something colder. Inside palace walls, tension became palpable. Advisors sensed it. Conversations paused when Anne entered rooms. Long-standing alliances felt uncertain. The monarchy projects unity to the world, but internally it was beginning to fracture along invisible lines of doubt. And as whispers began to circulate within palace walls, another question emerged: who else already knew? Silence can be louder than confession. When Anne began making quiet inquiries, certain members of the royal inner circle avoided her calls. Meetings were postponed. Statements were vague. It wasn't denial, it was evasion. And that silence suggested the discovery in Charles's office wasn't entirely unexpected to everyone. At first, the resistance was subtle. A senior aide who normally responded within minutes suddenly required schedule confirmation. A strategy meeting that had been routine for years was quietly delayed. Explanations were polite, measured, professional, but hollow. Anne recognized the shift immediately. She has navigated palace politics long enough to know when coordination turns into containment. The king's private secretary became a focal point of whispered speculation. Rumors suggested that this official had authorized the storage of specific documents in Charles's restricted workspace, rather than the standard archival route. It was an unusual deviation. Sensitive materials are typically distributed through controlled channels, reviewed by multiple hands. Yet these particular files had bypassed broader oversight and landed directly inside that sealed drawer. That was not oversight. That was intention. The timeline, once reconstructed, felt disturbingly deliberate. The photograph dated back years. The financial adjustments had been executed in stages. Legal amendments were staggered just far enough apart to avoid drawing collective attention. And most striking of all, the most recent modifications were finalized mere days before Anne's unplanned visit to the office. The precision felt less like coincidence and more like choreography. Evidence of compartmentalized information flow began surfacing quietly. Certain advisors appeared informed about fragments of the arrangement but not its entirety. Others were briefed only on estate valuations, not beneficiary structures. The system had been designed to limit exposure. Knowledge was divided, layered, controlled. No single person aside from Charles seemed to hold the full picture. Anne confronted a longtime palace advisor, someone who had served the family faithfully for decades. The exchange was calm, but the tension underneath it was unmistakable. She asked direct questions about procedural authorization and disclosure thresholds. The advisor responded with technical language, referencing strategic necessity and executive privilege. It was a carefully constructed defense, but it did not satisfy her. Because the issue was no longer procedural, it was moral. Whispers began to circulate of a contingency plan prepared months earlier. A document outlining response strategies in case internal objections surfaced. That suggested anticipation. Someone had foreseen resistance. Someone had calculated potential fallout long before Anne ever opened that drawer. And if contingency planning existed, then secrecy had not been a protective reflex. It had been policy. More unsettling still were murmurs that at least one council member had quietly warned Charles about rising scrutiny weeks ago. A subtle caution. A suggestion to reconsider timing. Yet the financial changes moved forward anyway. If that warning was real, then Charles had not acted in ignorance. He had acted despite awareness. The atmosphere among senior royals shifted from quiet unease to guarded suspicion. Conversations became strategic rather than familial. Long-standing alliances felt fragile. Anne sensed that the room was no longer neutral ground. Every pause carried meaning. Every delay felt intentional. Because when silence spreads this quickly, it rarely spreads alone. It carries history. It carries design. And it carries the weight of those who already understand more than they are willing to admit. But if others already knew, then Anne's discovery wasn't accidental, it was inevitable. Behind closed doors, no cameras, no aides, just a brother and a sister. Sources described the meeting as controlled fury. Anne didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She demanded answers. And Charles reportedly did not deny the authenticity of what she found. What was said in that room may never be public, but its consequences are already rippling outward. The confrontation was not theatrical. It was precise. Anne entered with the documents in hand, not as ammunition, but as proof. She referenced the financial transfers, directly dates, amended percentages, the estate reallocations, the layered beneficiary structures. Her voice, those familiar say, was steady. But beneath that steadiness was something harder than anger. It was disappointment sharpened into resolve. Charles did not feign ignorance. He did not dismiss the papers as misunderstanding. Instead, he reportedly leaned into a phrase that would define the exchange: strategic discretion. 2 words. Calmly delivered. Carefully chosen. He framed the decisions as necessary recalibrations, made to preserve long-term continuity. Not deception. Not concealment. Strategy. That distinction did not ease the tension. The discussion quickly shifted from numbers to principle. Anne pressed him on oversight. Why bypass the council? Why compartmentalize information from senior royals who have stood beside him through decades of turbulence? Charles countered with legacy. With responsibility. With the burden of leadership that requires, in his view, decisions that are not always popular but are essential for stability. It was no longer about paperwork. It was about philosophy. The emotional undercurrent of their shared history surfaced in quieter tones. These were not just sovereign and royal advisor. They were siblings who have weathered public storms together. They remember the pressures of succession, the strain of expectation, the years when unity was survival. Anne reminded him of those moments, of how she defended him when others questioned his readiness, of how she absorbed criticism to preserve the image of strength around him. And now she was asking a simple question. Why was she not trusted with the truth? Charles spoke of long-term stability, of shielding the monarchy from unnecessary internal conflict. He suggested that full disclosure at the wrong moment could have fractured fragile alliances, that sometimes discretion protects more than transparency exposes. In his mind, the choices were not selfish. They were protective, but Anne saw the cost differently. She insisted that protection built on secrecy erodes from within. That unity achieved by withholding information is brittle. That leadership is not just about guarding the institution from external threat but from internal decay. Her words were not dramatic, but they carried weight, because they were rooted in loyalty, not rebellion. For a moment, the conversation reportedly fell silent. Not from defeat, from recognition. Charles defended his judgment firmly. He believed the outcomes justified the path. He believed he had acted within his authority. Yet he also understood that the fracture now exposed could not be ignored. The meeting did not end in shouting. It ended in uneasy agreement. They would reconvene with limited council oversight. A formal review would be initiated, not publicly, not yet, but internally acknowledged. It was a compromise born not of resolution, but of necessity. As Anne left the room, neither victory nor surrender followed her. Only tension, only uncertainty. Because while the confrontation had brought hidden decisions into the open, it had not answered the question that lingered beneath it all. Why that estate? Why that beneficiary? Why that level of secrecy? Yet even after that confrontation, one piece of the puzzle remained unresolved. There was one name repeated across multiple pages, a name Anne reportedly hadn't expected. A name tied to past tension within the monarchy. And if those documents are authentic, That name may explain why Charles chose secrecy over consultation. Because this wasn't just administrative, it was personal. The repetition was subtle at first. A surname appearing in beneficiary clauses. An initial embedded within trust amendments. A reference tucked inside layered legal phrasing that most would skim past without pause. But Anne does not skim. She reads with precision. And when she realized that the same identity surfaced again and again, the discovery shifted from concerning to seismic. This was not a neutral figure. This was someone whose past involvement with royal affairs had sparked quiet controversy years ago. An individual once positioned near the center of influence, then gradually distanced amid internal strain. Their presence in sensitive estate matters now raised a question too sharp to ignore. Had old alliances been revived behind closed doors? There had been historical tension between Anne and this individual. Not theatrical rivalry, not public disagreement, but fundamental differences in approach, in values, in how power should be exercised within the institution. Anne believes in accountability rooted in tradition. The beneficiary in question had once advocated for strategic modernization at almost any cost. That philosophical divide had never fully healed. The legal language shielding the identity was masterfully constructed. Beneficiary designations were layered through subsidiary trusts, intermediaries, and coded references. On paper, it was airtight. Discreet, unassailable. But that complexity revealed intent. If transparency had been the goal, clarity would have sufficed. Instead, concealment had been engineered. Strategically, the estate positioning carried weight beyond money. Control of that particular property meant influence over long-term resource distribution. It meant leverage in future structural decisions. It meant quiet authority embedded within land and legacy. And if this individual held that leverage, the implications extended beyond present conflict into future succession optics. Because perception matters. If word of such an arrangement ever surfaced publicly, it would not be viewed as routine estate planning. It would be framed as favoritism, as consolidation, as private loyalty outweighing institutional balance. The monarchy survives on public trust, internal trust, and revelations of selective empowerment could fracture both. Anne understood the potential backlash instantly. Not scandal in the dramatic sense, but erosion. Questions. Doubt. The slow weakening of confidence. That was the real danger. Not outrage, but skepticism. Her response was immediate and unwavering. She insisted on accountability not quietly, not symbolically, but structurally. She demanded that the arrangement be reviewed under formal oversight, that beneficiary designations be justified before the appropriate council bodies. Not to embarrass Charles, not to punish, but to protect what remains fragile. Meanwhile, the palace crisis team was discreetly activated. Communication strategies were drafted preemptively. Contingency messaging prepared. The machine of the institution began moving in anticipation of exposure, even if exposure never came. And yet, as Anne examined the broader context, something unsettled her more than the name itself. Because this was too calculated to be spontaneous, too layered to be isolated. But the deeper Anne dug, the more she realized this wasn't about one decision, it was about a pattern. When one hidden document becomes two, and then three, it stops being coincidence. Princess Anne reportedly uncovered earlier adjustments smaller, quieter, but unmistakably similar. A pattern stretching back years. If true, it suggests Charles had been making private structural shifts long before this moment. And that realization may be the most destabilizing discovery of all. The deeper Anne examined the archive trail, the clearer the outline became. Past estate redistributions that once appeared routine now carried sharper meaning. Minor reallocations. Subtle trust modifications. Incremental beneficiary adjustments that, in isolation, seemed harmless. But placed side by side, they formed a deliberate sequence. A quiet recalibration of influence that had unfolded over time, shielded by the comfort of normalcy. Confidential advisory memos surfaced in parallel documents, framed as strategic consultations, yet limited in circulation. Their language was measured but pointed. Controlled transition. selective disclosure, long-range positioning. These were not reactive decisions. They were forward-looking maneuvers, executed with patience. And patience in matters of power is rarely accidental. Even more unsettling was the timing. Several adjustments aligned with periods of intense public distraction moments when the monarchy was navigating external crises or ceremonial transitions. While headlines focused elsewhere, structural shifts moved quietly beneath the surface. It was not dramatic. It was disciplined, and that discipline suggested foresight. Anne began to see the cumulative impact. This was not about one estate, not about one beneficiary. It was about consolidation. Influence tightening around specific nodes of control, the kind of long-term planning that bypasses confrontation by avoiding visibility. And while such strategy may be defensible in theory, its execution without full council view created an imbalance that could not be ignored. For years, Anne trusted that differences in leadership style did not threaten the institution's core. Charles preferred privacy, she preferred consultation. That contrast had coexisted without rupture. But now the evidence suggested privacy had evolved into unilateral structuring. And unilateral structuring, even when well-intended, alters power dynamics permanently. The risk was no longer hypothetical. Institutional credibility rests not only on public ceremony but on internal fairness. If senior royals began to suspect that key decisions were orchestrated beyond shared governance, fractures would deepen. Trust among siblings, confidence among advisors, stability among estates. The monarchy's greatest strength, its continuity, could slowly erode from within. The divide was already visible. Conversations grew sharper. Alignments shifted subtly. Some defended Charles's foresight, arguing that monarchs must sometimes act decisively to protect the crown from stagnation. Others quietly sided with Anne, insisting that reform must begin with transparency, not secrecy. The disagreement was not loud, but it was real. Anne's response intensified. She called for urgent reform of internal review processes, not cosmetic adjustments, but structural safeguards ensuring that no estate redistribution or trust modification could proceed without documented multi-party oversight. Her tone was not rebellious, it was resolute, because she understood what was at stake. This was no longer a family disagreement. It was a question of governance, of legacy, of whether power concentrated quietly over years can ever be fully balanced again. And as the weight of cumulative decisions settled into clarity, Anne faced a moment few in royal history encounter: the choice between silent loyalty and necessary confrontation. The crown's stability hung in that balance. And now, the monarchy stands at a crossroads because what Anne does next could redefine everything. Princess Anne has never sought the spotlight. But this time, she may have no choice. Sources suggest she delivered an ultimatum: transparency, oversight, and immediate review, or consequences that could echo beyond palace walls. The monarchy survives on unity, but unity built on secrecy fractures quickly. And what Anne found in that office may force the most honest reckoning the crown has faced in years. The request was formal, measured, undeniable. Anne called for an independent internal review, one not confined to the king's private circle, but overseen by neutral legal authorities within the royal framework. Not to humiliate, not to weaken, but to restore balance. Her position was clear: if structural shifts had occurred without full consultation, then structural correction must follow with equal seriousness. This was not rebellion, it was duty in its most uncompromising form. There are whispers that council restructuring is now being quietly explored. New procedural safeguards, broader disclosure thresholds, a recalibration of executive discretion. For decades, Charles's leadership style has leaned toward controlled decision-making. Now that very strength is under scrutiny, not from critics outside the palace gates, but from within his own family. The strain is visible, even if unspoken. Royal siblings who once moved in quiet solidarity now navigate a more cautious dynamic. Conversations are careful. Alliances feel recalculated. Loyalty is no longer assumed, it is examined. And for Charles, the weight of authority feels heavier than ever, because authority questioned from within carries more consequence than any public critique. Outwardly, the narrative remains composed. Statements are measured. Engagements proceed. The monarchy projects continuity, as it always has. But behind that composure, strategy teams are working tirelessly to manage potential fallout. Messaging drafts sit ready. Legal clarifications prepared. The institution knows that perception, once cracked, must be repaired swiftly. And yet something deeper has shifted. Future succession optics now hover in the background of every decision. If internal governance can be challenged at this level, what precedent does it set for the next era? What lessons will future heirs absorb from this fracture? Stability has always been the monarchy's greatest shield. Now that shield feels tested. Anne's commitment has never wavered. Through triumph and turbulence, she has remained anchored to the idea that the crown must outlast personalities. Her insistence on accountability is not about personal grievance, it is about preservation. She understands that silence may protect today, but transparency protects tomorrow. Still, there is no neat resolution. The review has begun, but conclusions remain distant. Relationships have been strained, but not severed. The institution stands yet not unchanged. And in the quiet hours when decisions are weighed without ceremony, one question lingers heavier than the rest. If this pattern extended back years, how much more remains hidden in plain sight? Were these documents the full story or merely the fragments that surfaced first? Because patterns rarely reveal themselves all at once. They unfold gradually, exposing layer after layer. The confrontation has forced honesty. The ultimatum has demanded reform. But the deeper mystery, the one that unsettles even the most seasoned royal observers, has not yet been answered. Because if one drawer could shake the foundation of the crown, what might still be hidden behind the next locked door?